So, what is a sense of self? Why do some people have a really strong sense of self and some people don't so much have a strong sense of self? How do we find it and how do we lose it in the first place? And why is this all important? So I'm going to be answering these questions in this video because I have found that knowing who we are, who we believe ourselves to be, and knowing how it feels to be us at our best is one of the most stabilising things that we can do and learn how to cultivate within ourselves, so that we're not swept up by the winds of change and people's opinions and judgments and ideas of how things should be, because the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and the judgments and the ways that we were brought up to believe that things should be a certain way are often the reason why we lose our sense of self in the first place. When you know who you are, when you know what you believe in, when you know what is right and wrong to you, when you know what feels right and wrong to you, you're able to love those parts of yourself. You're able to stand up for those parts of yourself. You're able to honour your dreams, your hopes, your wishes, your yes, your no, your everything. And you're able to show up authentically in relationships without the fear of not being loved for anything other than who you really are, the person that you're born to be. So having a sense of self and knowing who you are is basically self-concept. It's who we believe ourselves to be, the perception we have of ourselves, what we think is right and wrong, and how we believe it feels to be us, what it actually feels like to be who we are. And it's something that's changeable over the course of our lives. But sometimes you hear people saying, or you may have said it yourself, I've lost myself. I don't know who I am. I don't know what it feels like to be me. I don't know what I want. And this can happen for a lot of reasons. So the first thing that I want to say is that often we will find it more difficult to feel into our sense of self if we grew up in an environment where creativity, our opinions, our yes and our no's were not encouraged or nurtured when we were young. So if we were in an environment, whether it was at home or at school, where we were told to be a certain way, or we were expected to act in a certain way, or maybe it wasn't safe to act in a certain way, to be who we really wanted to be or act how we wanted to, then often what happens as a trauma response to that, because it feels unsafe to be who we are, is we push down the things that we believe in, the ways that we want to move, the way that we want to act, the things that we want to say, in order to please the people around us so that we can feel safe in our bodies. Because if we weren't to do that, we would feel really unsafe. We'd be maybe scared of creating chaos in an already chaotic environment, or we'd be scared of making someone angry, or we'd be afraid of letting someone down or disappointing someone, or just not being perceived as good by the people around us. And often this really comes into the school environment that we grew up in, where we're expected to act a certain way, think a certain way, want to study a certain way. And sometimes even things like learning styles and preferences in the way that we think and write and talk and play can be either overlooked and not seen, or just not acknowledged in the way that we needed when we were younger. And this makes it really difficult for us to step into our true sense of self. Often what happens then is so many people will go into people pleasing, trying to be perceived as good, especially when we were young, because if we're perceived as good by our parents, our caregivers, or the people around us, teachers or whatever, then we feel safe. So often people have this kind of good girl or good boy syndrome. That's not like a scientific term, but we just want to be perceived as good so that we can feel safe. This can result in things like overworking, overstudying, people pleasing, in the sense that maybe once you were rewarded for being really, really generous, and so that can result sometimes in overspending and having a shopping addiction, which is definitely what happened to me. But yeah, being generous with your time and overgiving in your time because you don't want to let someone down and you want to be perceived as good. But when we do these people-pleasing tendencies too much, whether that's saying yes when we mean no, overgiving, oversharing, overdoing, overworking, whatever whatever we're doing to please other people so that we can feel safe, it's actually unconscious manipulation. And that's not to say that we're bad people and we've done something wrong, but we're just trying to find a way, the quickest possible, easiest way for us to feel safe and that we're good and that we're liked and that we're approved of. And often we do feel that sense of relief and connection to ourselves whenever we get that praise or that love, that external approval and gratitude. Part of the appeal in the overgiving, overloving, overworking and the people pleasing is that we get something out of it, even when we're doing things that we actually don't want to do. Even when we're saying yes when we mean no, we still are getting something out of it, because what we're looking for is for the reaction that we get from doing those things. And we start to identify as the one who overgives. We start to identify as the saviour, the one who makes people feel better. And because we start to identify ourselves as this person who makes people feel better, or as the person who is rewarded for their hard work, and they see themselves as someone who is rewarded for working hard and the things that you might achieve from doing that, even if it's overworking, we get an identity from it, and we start to feel a connection to ourselves that we didn't get when we were younger, because we weren't allowed to fully express ourselves with our creativity, with our words, with our language, with the way we dress, or whatever it was that didn't feel safe when we were young. And we create this coping mechanism of people pleasing in order to find that reconnection to ourselves. But the problem is that it often backfires when we don't get the reaction that we want, when we don't get the responses that we want, we don't get the approval, or maybe it just goes completely unnoticed, and we start to resent people, we start to feel angry at people, and we start to lose even more that connection to ourselves. So this is just one example of how we can lose connection to ourselves. And as I say, it starts in childhood often, when we've been in a situation where it hasn't felt safe, or it hasn't felt right, or we didn't feel like we would be perceived as good if we did or said certain things, or if we behaved in a certain way. And also if our behaviour, maybe it was a learning disability, maybe it was a preference for a way of working or learning that was overlooked or ignored, or just not catered to, it makes us feel like we are bad, or we've done something wrong, or there's something wrong with us, so we therefore can't accept ourselves, and we don't like who we are, and we need to adjust it to the way that the world thinks we should be. So it might be useful at this point to pause the video, get a notebook, get a pen, and just have a little journal about anything you can remember from your childhood or your teenage years, or even your adult years, where you felt oppressed in any way, or some close relationships when you were younger, where you felt scared of someone's response of something that you said or did or didn't do, or something that didn't happen or did happen when you were younger, for fear of looking bad or wrong. Because again, it comes back to shame and feeling like we're bad or wrong. If we feel that sense of shame, like we've done something wrong, or we're not good according to the eyes of our parents or caregivers or teachers, then that shame will drive anxiety, and that will propel us to do the people pleasing and to try to make ourselves how we think we should be for those around us, which is a large reason of why many people grow up with a really weak connection to their sense of self. So it'd be good to just observe and notice any of those relationships or circumstances or situations or memories that you can remember where that happened when you were young. And it doesn't matter, you don't need to find the exact one, you don't need to find the root of all this or where it began. Just having a general awareness will be really, really useful. So you can see how these situations can evolve, and it's often through no fault of anyone's. It's just often generational beliefs and people's opinions about the way things should be. No one really ever means any harm. No one ever means for us to lose a connection to ourselves. People and our parents generally want the best for us. They usually try to protect us. So if you can also see this through the eyes of compassion, that we're not trying to blame anyone, we're not trying to make anyone wrong, we're just trying to understand why we are the way we are. Our teenage years are so incredibly formative, and I would argue that our teenage years are just as important and can be just as formative and traumatic as our youngest earliest years, because it's at that age that we start to think about who we want to be, who we believe we are, what feels right and wrong to us. We start to become really aware of our feelings and when something feels good for us, and we're conflicted, so conflicted by the world and how other people are behaving. And at school you start to see groups form, like there's the geeks, the ones who want to talk about science, and then there's the goths who dressed in black, and then there's the skater chicks and the skater kids, and then there's the cool kids and the popular gang. And it's the same everywhere you go. There's all these forms and groups of people. People find themselves drawn to groups and people that they feel most able to express themselves with. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes people find it hard to fit into any group. And I definitely was like that. I was kind of jumping from group to group because I had such a weak sense of self and didn't really know where I belonged. Sometimes I found myself in the cool group, and sometimes I found myself in the skater chick group. And then sometimes I found myself nowhere, not knowing who to hang out with or where to be, and I was quite lonely. And that can be true for many people too. And it'd be really interesting to hear your experience of your teenage years as well. You know, where were you? Where did you hang out? At that age, we're starting to think about our sexuality, how we want to dress, our interests, our passions. We're starting to think about all these things, and we're starting to be drawn to certain things that we like or dislike, and people that we like or dislike. And it's at this age also that it can be incredibly confusing, because we can get pulled into groups where maybe we don't necessarily feel right there. Maybe it's not who we want to be, but we're just experimenting and trying different things, putting on different hats, and really starting to cultivate a sense of self. And at this age, in our teen years, this is often when we start to want to and be interested in relationships. And some of us, and definitely by no means everyone, this is such a mixed experience for everybody, can be drawn to being in a serious relationship by the age of 12, 13, 14, 15. And it's an interesting time. And, you know, many parents are like, nope, you can't have a boyfriend until you're 18. And in some ways, I kind of understand it, because actually it can be really, really traumatic for people to be in relationships at such a young age, when we're still cultivating a sense of self. We're still trying to know who we are so that we can stand up for our yes and stand up for our no, and say what we believe and really be who we are in a relationship. Because what can happen, especially in young relationships and relationships all throughout our life, if we're not aware of our sense of self, is that we can be dragged along with other people's sense of self. And if someone develops a strong sense of self and we have a weak sense of self, then we're much more likely to be swept up into codependency and becoming more like them so that we can please them and be close to them, because we haven't developed our own strong sense of self. And I don't know about you guys, but this is definitely something that happened to me when I was 14 and 15. I was starting to know that I loved music and performing and songwriting, and I loved being on stage, and I loved being around people. But my boyfriend had a very, very strong sense of self at the time. He was very, very popular. He was a Christian that everybody respected. Even the people who were never Christian and would never think about being a Christian flocked to him, because he was so influential on people, because he had such a strong character and sense of who he was. And I got swept along with his sense of self. I became a Christian to please him because I felt like that's what he wanted. I stopped doing my music and I turned down a contract with Disney because he had a really strong idea about how he wanted his life to be. He didn't want fame, he didn't identify with that, and I got swept up into his identity and lost mine. And so I was starting to say things like, I've lost myself and I don't know how I feel. And we start to blame the person, blame who we're with, blame the outside, because we have given too much of ourselves away to another person in order to please them and make them happy. And this can happen at all times in life, right, if we don't have a strong sense of self. So this is one of the reasons why it is so important that we go, into relationships, especially whole and complete, that we're bringing our whole self into a relationship. When people say things like, you complete me, or you're my other half, it's really just bullshit. It's just bullshit, because No one can complete you. You are a whole person. The idea is that we have two people whole together, enjoying the best parts of ourselves, when we can, and we're fulfilling our needs on our own, and we're staying true to what we believe in and who we feel we are. We're saying yes when we mean yes and no when we mean no, and we are aware of how we feel, and we have that confidence, that real inner confidence, to know that it's okay for me to feel what I feel, and I have to honour this so that I can be true to myself and show up as the most loving version of me for all the people around you. So this is why it is so important to be able to cultivate and know who you are and how you feel about yourself. Right, so how do we do that? Let's go on to that. Something that would be really good to do in a notebook or in a journal or wherever you want to do it is start to do like a personal inventory of yourself. What are your strong beliefs in life? What do you think is really right? And what's something that you think is really wrong, or some things? Write down a list of things that you think are really right and good, and things about life that you think are wrong and you don't believe in. And it can be politics, it could be environment, it could be relationship. Wherever you have strong beliefs about something that you want to live by, that you believe are true for you, write them down. So then I want you to write down about your passions and your interests. What do you find really interesting? What do you love doing? Write down those things, the things that really, really light you up, and the things that you want to carry with you no matter where you go. So what are those things, if any? If you can't think of anything like, I'm really, really passionate about this, don't worry. Sometimes people can't, and that's fine too. But see if anything does come up. And then your likes, things that you just like, food that you like, smells that you like, sounds that you like, music that you like. What are your likes, the things that you like, enjoy about life? And what are things that you really dislike, even if it's like tomatoes or horror movies or whatever it is? What are your dislikes? What don't you like? And then I really want you to start to notice, and you don't have to write this down, but you can if you want. You can start to notice how you feel when you're at your best. What's the mood like? What's your energy like? What are your energy levels like? What are you doing when you're at your best, when you believe you're at your best? What are your triggers? What triggers you? What makes you feel really mad or anxious? Is there a time of day or a time of year where you're likely to feel lower, depressed even, or anxious? Are there situations that make you feel anxious right now? Or situations or people or places that you like or don't like? Just start to become aware of and write down these things, all of these amazing, beautiful, interesting, unique quirks that you have. Write them all down. They're all so interesting, beautiful, and unique to you, right? They make you who you are. And by doing this, you're starting to cultivate and become aware of your sense of self, which, as I say, will change and morph and grow and move over the years and over time, because that's what we do. We're constantly evolving. There may be new interests, new passions that come along, new beliefs, new ideas that come in that spark your inspiration and make you feel different about certain things. But right now, are there some things that have always been true for you? And are there some things that are new for you? Write those down too. Write down the things that you love about who you are. Write down your personality traits, or about the way that you look. What do you love? And then I want you to write down the things that you don't like so much, that you wish were slightly different, that you wish you could change. And with that list, I want you to give yourself the permission and the compassion to love those parts of you too. To love your anxiety, love your depression, love the times where you get really angry and you don't know why. Love your reactions, your responses, your confusion. Love all of those things too, because they are part of who you are right now, and they're making you evolve and become even more of who you are. And if you can give yourself compassion for those parts too, you'll be able to bring your whole self into a relationship without feeling like those parts are something to be ashamed of, because they're not. They're part of the beautiful you. I also think it's really useful to spend some time alone, just with you, to get to know how it feels to be you. How do you feel in the morning? How do you feel in the evening? Get to know how it physically feels to be you. Go for a walk, spend time in nature. These things are all really, really good for getting to know who you are as well. Also, I think it is really important to pursue those things that you're interested in and spend time with those passions and interests and hobbies that you have. No matter how small or how big they are, use them, spend time with them. They are there for your creative nature and purpose, and they want to be used and loved by you. So do those things, do the things that you love. And of course, your sense of self is also who you believe you are, in relationships, who you believe you are at work, who you believe you are in relation to money. And these things are all changeable because we know that we can rewire the brain to think and believe differently. So also you can write down and notice, what are your beliefs right now about each area of your life, and what would you like them to be? What would you like them to be? Because that is where we're going. So as I say, getting to know your sense of self is just an incredibly powerful thing to give you confidence in navigating the winds of change in life and relationships, so that you don't fall into codependency or relationship anxiety, and that you're not disappointed by the world and the way that it shows up for you, because you can still stay in touch with yourself, and it's such a grounding, stable, secure place to be. So let me know how you get on with this, and we will speak about it in the next session, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.